Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. So Rephr is having some really big sales coming up for Black Friday, and so I thought this was a good opportunity to run through with you all my Rephr brush collection. I have 19 of their brushes, which is the majority of all of their brushes, and I also have several of their makeup organization units. I have their eye curler and their brush soap, and so I thought I could give you guys a pretty good overview of their product line. In case you guys aren't familiar with Rephr, they are a natural hair, Japanese-made Fude makeup brush brand. And so they're basically a more affordable alternative to a lot of other Fude brush brands, and they have a very different business model. Basically, unlike most makeup brush founders, their founders are not actually experts in makeup or makeup brushes. Instead, they have more of a startup model where they have tried out a lot of different brush types, and then they rely a lot on customer feedback to improve those brush types. And so over the years, they've iterated a lot on their brushes. And for me, I would say that Rephr is not my favorite makeup brush brand. I definitely prefer my Sonia G, Chikuhodo, and Wayne Goss brushes on the whole. But I do think that whenever Rephr is having these really huge sales, so 50% is about as high as they ever go, which is what this Black Friday sale will be, but they do actually often have 40% off sales. And all the brushes I'll talk about today, I purchased for at least 40% off. And so at that price point, I think they are definitely worth it and would recommend them, especially for any of you who are starting out with Fude brushes and not quite sure yet what kind of shapes and sizes you'd like. I think Rephr is a really great starting point for a beginner or for someone with a larger collection to kind of fill in the gaps with new shapes. So if you are interested in learning more about Rephr, then just stick around. So the way I'm going to do today's video is I have all of the brushes laid out in front of me right now in order. And at first I was just going to go by number and give you guys speed reviews, but then I figured it might be more useful for you if I actually demo the products. So I'm going to do a full face of makeup using all of my Rephr brushes, and then at the end of the video I'll talk about their other products. So let's start out with foundation. So I'm going in with my Dior Forever Skin Glow in the shade 2N. And I'm going to use my Rephr number 17 brush. This is like a flat top brush and is quite petite, so I find that this is really good for navigating the contours of your face, especially if you have a smaller face like myself. They also have a larger foundation brush that is quite a bit more pricey. And so I have been eyeing that, but I think honestly this brush is a pretty good shape and size for me because as you can see, like this sort of area over here and around the nose area is where this brush is just really easy to glide the product around your face, whereas a larger brush might be a little bit trickier. And I find this leaves a pretty nice seamless finish to the skin. Now this foundation is a bit light for me, so I'm going to take this down my neck. And overall, I'm quite a fan of this brush. I think it's really good as a starting point for a foundation brush. It's quite affordable as far as foundation brushes go. And as you can see, it does a pretty good job of just stamping in the product. You can also use this for cream contour and cream blush because it's that nice, really petite size. Now, this is not going to give you the most luxurious feeling ever. As you can see, the hairs do kind of splay out after you've used it. And it does shed a little bit. So I would say this is a solid starter foundation brush or cheek brush, but not necessarily my overall favorite in my collection. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but all of Rephr's brushes are made out of undyed goat hair, and so you can use them for both cream, liquid, and powder products. For most of the brushes though that I'll talk through today, I pretty much exclusively use them for powders, but this one and the Rephr number 32, which I use for concealer, are the only two that I use with liquids and creams. So speaking of this brush, let's get into this. This is my favorite brush from them for concealer. This has a very interesting hoof shape to it. I think this brush can also be used for cream shadows on the lids, but I don't really use cream shadows, and so I've pretty much exclusively used this brush for concealer like I'm doing right now. I find that it's a really nice size to give you precision, so it's not necessarily going to blend things out super quickly, but if you want some more targeted application of concealer, this is really great. And the hoof shape just means that you can use it at a more comfortable angle. Instead of stamping it on like this, you can sort of use it in more downward facing strokes. And today I'm using my Dior Forever Skin Correct Concealer in the shade 2N, and so as you can see, it matches the foundation quite well. Alrighty, so there we go. Here we have the base done. I think both of these brushes did a great job. I would say the only thing I don't really like about these is, as you can see, after you use them, they do really get a bit saturated with product, and so cleaning them can be a little bit of a pain. For the most part, I am more of a beauty blender girl. I feel like it's just a lot easier to keep the beauty blender clean. But these both are very solid brushes if you're in the market for a concealer or foundation brush. Moving right along, I have a bunch of powder brushes from Rephr, so let's first just hold these up. So I have their brush 18 and 19, and I spent a long time online trying to figure out the differences between these two brushes, but you can see that brush 19 is more of kind of a oval shape and has a bit of a point at the top. So I find that's really handy for setting the under eye area and getting into more precise points. Whereas in contrast, the brush 18 is more of a round shape, and so I find this one is a little bit better for blush, where you kind of want a round application. I also have brushes 4 and 5. 4 over here with this angle is actually one of my favorite brushes for contour and bronzer, whereas 5 is much bigger and fluffier, and I find it's really good for all over face powder and also for blush. And here are all of them next to each other. So we have brush 19, 18, 5, and 4. So to illustrate these with you, I'm going to use a variety of different brushes just to put my powder on. Usually I would just go in with one of these brushes. But to start, I'm going to go in with the Rephr number 19. And as I mentioned, this point is pretty good for under eye powder. So I'm going to go in with this Pat McGrath powder and just use this to set the under eye area. So even though this is bigger than the 18, because it has this point, I find it just better for that under eye area. And whatever's left, I'm going to sweep that just on the lids. I'm also going to use this just to get around my mouth and nose area. And then for the rest of my face, I'm going to go in with my By Terry loose powder. And for this, I'm going to go in with the Rephr number 5 brush and just use this to sweep some powder around the rest of my face. So you'll notice that I don't have any of the really big powder brushes from Rephr, and that's both because I have a relatively small face and also because I find that their bigger powder brushes just don't seem like as good of a deal to me. Because to me, if I'm going to spend around $100 for a brush, I would prefer to go in with a brush from Sonia G, for example, or some of my other favorite brands. Rephr is really nice, but not quite at the $100 level, at least for me. So there we go. Now my face is fully mattified, so I'm going to go off camera to do my brows and then be back for the rest of the face. So I'm back with brows and lips done, and as always, everything will be linked in the description box down below. So normally I would go into eyes now, but I'm actually going to finish off the face products just because we already started talking about these face brushes. So let's start with some contour, and I really love this Rephr number 4 brush for that. So I'm going to go into this little Hourglass Sculpture palette and just start brushing this on. This was actually one of my first brushes from Rephr, and oh wow, actually this is a little bit more pigmented than I was expecting, but let's try to blend this out. But I really love the angled nature of this brush. I feel like it makes it really easy to put on product with a little bit more control. And especially the size of this brush is actually really good if you have a smaller face like me. I find that a lot of brushes that are meant for bronzer are just a little bit big for me. So you guys might have seen that I recently picked up Sonia G's Jumbo Bronzer brush. I also have her Niji Pro and Face Pro. And I'm still thinking about doing a video that features all three, comparing them. But one thing I have found with all three of those is they are a little bit big for me. So I do find it's a little bit harder for me to get this level of precision with those really big bronzer brushes. And so I still do like going in with this Rephr number 4. Let me also just sweep a little bit on my nose area as well. This is a little bit large for the nose area, but can still make it work. This brush is also the perfect size for blush as well. I'm not going to use it for that today, but just so you guys know, as you can see, you can easily stamp on some blush as well. So this is definitely one of the Rephr brushes I would most highly recommend. For blush today though, I'm going to go in with this Rephr number 18 brush, and I'm going to go into my Addiction blush. This is the shade Orchid Dust, and I'm just going to use this to stamp it on. This brush, I would say, is a really nice brush for blush, but is not necessarily as versatile as some of the other Rephr brushes. So if you have a small brush collection, I wouldn't recommend jumping out and getting this brush to start out. It's very nice, as you can see, for this sort of application of blush, but I don't find it to be as good at other tasks. Whereas like the Rephr number 4, I think is good at blush, but also good at contour. And the Rephr number 5 is good at blush, but also good at powder. But this one is good for a more targeted, careful blush application because the brush is quite small. Going back to the Rephr number 5 though, just for a second, this is actually one of my favorite blush brushes if you want a more diffused application. So let's actually switch over to this blush over here from the Hourglass palette. And I find that this is really, oh, whoa, okay, that was a little bit much, but I find that this is really good at putting a more diffuse layer on. You can sort of really get good area with this brush. So I put a little bit too much on just now, but that's more about the blush pickup and less about this brush. That said, this Rephr number 18 can be good for some cleanup work because it's a little bit smaller. You can use it to just kind of brush around the edges if you have any issues of patchiness. Speaking of patchiness, I feel like this powder really did not agree with that concealer that I used over here. Getting a lot of patchiness on this cheek. Let me actually turn down the brightness a little bit so you guys can see a little bit more clearly. So yeah, nothing to do with the brushes, but just quick comment about using the Dior Forever Skin Correct and this by Terry powder and these face powders. It is not agreeing over here, so I have to fix that later. So the sun was getting really intense, so I had to close that blind, but hopefully you guys can see things a little bit more clearly now. So this is what I was talking about. I don't know why this is so patchy over here and over here too. Yikes. Okay, I will have to fix that later. But anyway, moving right along. So next up we have the Rephr number 20 brush. So this is a fan brush that is perfect for highlight. I actually really enjoy this brush. I find that it's really nice for just picking up a nice layer of highlight and just sprinkling it on the high points of your cheeks. This is actually the first fan brush that I've ever had. I didn't really get why people liked fan brushes. It seemed like, you know, you wouldn't really have enough precision with them. But now that I've tried this, it's definitely made me a convert. Especially for on the nose highlight, it's a perfect shape and size for getting that area. And then as you can see, it just leaves a really nice wispy layer of highlight on the cheek area as well. So I would highly recommend this Rephr number 20 brush if you are interested in trying out fan brushes. This one is super soft and also quite affordable with the discount. So moving on from the face to the eyes, this is where I have by far the most Rephr brushes. I have almost all of their eye brushes. I think actually before the most recent release, I had all of their eye brushes. So we're going to use all of these guys today. So this is what we're working with at the moment. So for today's eye look, I'm going to go into the Natasha Denona Retro Glam palette. I just hauled this, and so this will be my second day of looks with this. If you want to see a 4 looks 1 palette using all of the shades, definitely check out my previous video featuring this palette. So before we get into the demo, I did just want to quickly show you guys a comparison of the various crease slash blending brushes. So here we have the 13, the 14, the 15, the 16, and the 27. So the 27 is definitely the loosest one, so this is good if you want a really quick wash of color on the lids. The 16 is the biggest one, and it's a little bit more bulbous. This one is by far my favorite for transition shades. Then we have the 15, which is a smaller version of the 16, and I really like this for more of a medium shade, so a bit deeper than the transition shade. And then we have the 14, and I love this one for the deepening shade. And then we have the 13, which is similar to the 14, but a bit smaller and has a flat top. I'm not a huge fan of this brush, but when I do use it, it's for the transition shade on the lower lash line. And while we're talking about these brushes, I did want to point out that one thing I'm not a huge fan of with Rephr is I do feel like they've kind of copied some shapes from other brands. Not that, you know, shapes are super proprietary or anything, but several of these are very, very close dupes for my favorite Wayne Goss brushes. So in particular, if you guys have been watching my channel for a while, you know that I'm absolutely in love with the Wayne Goss number 16. It's my overall favorite brush for transition shades, and it's basically one of my ride or die brushes. It's the only brush that I have a backup of. And so here's the Wayne Goss number 16, here's the Rephr number 16. They even have the same number, and you can see they are extremely similar brushes. Similarly, the Rephr number 15 over here is quite similar to the Wayne Goss number 17. The Wayne Goss number 17 is a little bit more pointy, but both of these are for similar use cases in terms of a mid-tone transition. And then the Rephr number 14 is super similar to the Wayne Goss number 19 brush. I mean, they're basically the same. I still prefer the Wayne Goss a little bit more. This one is by far my favorite brush for deepening up the crease area. But the Rephr number 14 is just a slightly more stiffer version with the exact same shape. Finally, the Rephr number 13 brush is basically the same as the Wayne Goss number 20 brush. Again, the only difference is the Wayne Goss is slightly softer. So basically, if you remove the Rephr number 27 from the equation, Rephr's original eye set is basically a mirror for Wayne Goss's eye set in terms of these crease brushes. And so that is something that annoys me a little bit because the Wayne Goss ones came out first. And even the brushes themselves look really similar with the white hair and the black handle and ferrule. And so it does feel like they were trying to exactly dupe Wayne Goss's brushes instead of coming up with their own concept. So I'm not really a fan of that, and that's something that does annoy me about Rephr. I mean, I don't know the whole story, so I can't totally judge, but it's just something I noticed. And I mean, on the one hand, I'm glad that because they have exact dupes, I don't have to worry about my favorite Wayne Goss brushes being discontinued permanently, because I do think some of the Wayne Goss brushes, like the Wayne Goss number 19, which I really love, has either been discontinued or sold out at Beautylish for the longest time. And so I am glad from that perspective that the Rephr number 14 is basically the same brush. But it is kind of annoying from the standpoint of taking someone's idea. So that is one thing I wanted to throw out there. So with that background out of the way, let's get into the eye look for today. So I'm going to start out with the Rephr number 27 brush, and I'm going to go in with Lucy. So I'm going to just use this all over this eye as a transition, and you can see, given just how loose and fluffy this brush is, it makes very, very quick work of putting a transition shade on. It's just sort of like one swipe and you're done. On the other side, I'm going to use the Rephr number 16 brush just to show you guys that both of these can be used for this sort of use case. And I like both of them a lot. The Rephr number 16 I just like a little bit more because it reminds me of my Wayne Goss number 16. But these are basically ones that I use for pretty much the same purpose. And I will say I often, when I'm doing eye makeup, get a little bit lazy and also use this same brush for the mid-tone shade to sort of deepen up the crease area. But for today, I'm going to go in with the Rephr number 15 just to show you guys more brushes. So I'm going to deepen this look up a little bit by going into Fay. And this brush is just a little bit more precise, and so as you can see, it's more of a slowly building up the pigment. It lets you get a little bit more of that distinction between the overall transition and the outer corner area. But you can also use this for the initial transition shade if you want to be a little bit more targeted. Now with the Rephr number 14, I'm going to go into Evergreen. And actually, let me bring you guys in as well so you can see things a bit more clearly. So I'm going to brush Evergreen just along the outer portion of the eyes. And what I really like about this brush shape is that you can get sort of a diffused application that is going to blend in really nice with your transition shades. But you can also sort of build it up and get that opacity that you're looking for in the outer corner area. With the Rephr number 13 brush, I'm going to go in on the lower lash line with Lucy. And as I mentioned, I don't actually like this brush that much because the flat top just means it's a little bit less precise in comparison to the Rephr number 14 brush. So anything I would use this brush for, I generally prefer going in with the Rephr number 14. But for today, I'll just show you guys. So this is kind of how I use this brush. Now for applying shimmer shades, we have several options. So here is the Rephr number 1, number 2, number 21, and number 28. So this first one, the Rephr number 1, is actually kind of a multi-purpose brush. As you can see, it's a bit thick and fluffy. So you can either use this for applying transition shades or you can use it for applying shimmers. It's quite versatile in that way. And then with the Rephr number 2 brush, this one is sort of a little bit skinnier than that one, but still has a little bit of girth to it. So I primarily use this for lower lash line work, but also for applying shimmers. And then the Rephr number 21 and 28 are almost the same brush, just in different hairs. So this one is a much stiffer hair, whereas this one is your typical soft goat hair. And these are both very thin brushes, as you can see. So I primarily use these for packing on shimmers. So the Rephr number 1 for me is quite similar to Sonia G's worker brushes in concept. So they're not exact dupes. The Sonia G is definitely a bit thicker and larger, but both of them play a very similar role in terms of blending and packing. And then the Rephr number 2 is very similar to Sonia G's builder brushes. I mean, this is pretty much an exact dupe for the builder brush from Sonia G. So again, similar to what I said with the Wayne Goss, this is something I'm not a huge fan of with Rephr, that it seems like they come out with a lot of brushes that are very similar to other brands. And so, you know, again, just from a copying people's work sort of standpoint, I don't like that. That said, from a consumer standpoint, if you can't afford Sonia G or Wayne Goss brushes and you can get the Rephr brushes on a steep discount, then it can be a good way to try out these shapes and see if you want to buy the higher end version. So just to demo these brushes for you, I'm going to first go in with the Rephr number 1, and to show you guys the versatility, I'm going to first go into Sage and use this to kind of further build up some of these matte shades. So as you can see, basically with the shape of this brush, you can sort of pat on a matte and then sort of sweep it in the crease area. I normally prefer to just go in with the blending brushes I exhibited earlier for this sort of use case, but this is really nice, especially if you want more of a one and done kind of look. You could go in with one shadow and this brush and just sweep it all over. Now for the shimmers, I'm going to first go in with this Rephr number 28 brush into Palladian and put this on the inner portion of the eye. So I really like this brush for this sort of purpose. It's very nice and soft and provides a little bit more precision than the Rephr number 2, which has a flat top. Basically, the curved top of this is just nice to fit into smaller areas like the inner corner. Next, I'm going to take the Rephr number 21, and honestly, I don't actually like this one as much as the 28, so given how similar they are, I would say if you're debating between them, I would recommend just going in with the 28 because it's basically a softer version of this 21 brush, and for me, the additional stiffness just doesn't really do anything. Okay, so sorry for the discontinuity, but my camera stopped recording and I didn't notice, so I just kept on going on with the makeup look, but let me walk you guys through what I did. So basically, after I went in with Palladian on the 28 in the inner corner, I took the 21 brush and went in with Oscar, and I put this all over kind of the inner 2/3 of the lid. And then after that, I went in with my Rephr number 2 brush into Oz, and then I swept this kind of on the outer portion, blending it into the matte area. And what I was saying was that I find that the Rephr number 2 is quite versatile because you can use it for this packing action, but also, as I'll demonstrate shortly, you can also use it for the lower lash line, and I actually use this a lot for the lower lash line area. Whereas the 21 and 28 I pretty much exclusively use for packing on shimmers. And to be honest, I actually don't use these brushes that often because personally I find that I just get a lot more pigment payoff with a finger than with the brushes. And so most days I just use my fingers. But if you're someone who doesn't like using your fingers, then I do think these are pretty solid brushes, and especially the 28 would be the one that I would recommend more. And then after I completed that, I went in with my Rephr number 14 to just zhuzh the edges out. So what I did is I first went into Evergreen and just used it to kind of clean up this outer portion, because once I added Oz, there were some, lines here where the shimmer started and the mattes started. So I cleaned that up, and I wiped this off and went into Faye and just swept this on the inner 2/3 just to clean up edges there. So basically, I really love the Rephr number 14, also the Wayne Goss number 19 for this sort of use case of just after you've packed on all of your shimmers, sort of making sure that the shimmers and mattes actually blend in nicely together. So that brings us to now. So basically, to finish off this eyeshadow look on the top, I'm going to go in with this Rephr number 21 into Flutter and just use this glitter topper to just add a little bit more sparkle throughout the lid area. Again, this is something I normally just use my fingers for, but I wanted to show you with this brush just in case you don't like finger application. And then you can also use this brush kind of for this sort of motion just to carve out more of a shape. And then again, if there's anything that needs to be blended out, you can just go back in with that Rephr number 14 brush, sweep it along the crease just to make everything nicely blended. All right, so now let's go into the lower lash line, and this brings me to my more detailed brushes from Rephr. So here we have the Rephr number 3, 23, and 26. So you can see these are basically different sizes of pointy pencil brushes. The 23 is teeny tiny. I very rarely use this brush because I usually don't need that level of precision. The 3 is more moderately sized, and then we have the 26. And I actually use the 26 the most and would recommend that one. But for today, we're going to use all of these. So I'm going to first go in with the 26, and I'm going to use this to add Faye to the lower lash line because we already added some of Lucy, but I want to show you how this can be used to add a transition shade to the lower lash line. So what I like about this brush is it has sort of a strong tip that gives you some precision, but it's also big enough that you can use it in a more diffuse manner, like I'm doing right now, to give more of that sort of hazy appearance. To deepen things up though, I'm going to go in with this Rephr number 3 brush into Evergreen. And this one is just a little bit more targeted, so you can use it to add a little bit more precision. And then, of course, if you want even more precision, you can go in with this Rephr number 23. So if you're doing a very detailed look, this can be very good. You see, this almost makes it look like liner because it adds that additional level of precision. In terms of putting shimmers on the lower lash line, my favorite brush to use is the Rephr number 2. I actually often just use the Rephr number 2 for all of the lower lash line work because I find that the cross section is just perfect for laying down shades. And so first I'm going to go in with Oz, since that's the same shade we used on top, and I'm going to just put this kind of on the outer portion of the lower lash line area. And then quickly cleaning that off, I'm going into Oscar and then putting that on the middle portion. And then just to show you guys more use cases, I'm going to use the Rephr number 3 and go into Palladian and put this kind of in the inner third. This Rephr number 3 is also pretty good for targeted inner corner highlights. So I'll go into Flutter and just put a little bit of that on the inner corner area. I usually prefer a fluffier brush for this, but if you want something really targeted, the Rephr number 3 can do that. You can also go in with the Rephr number 26 if you want a little bit larger of an area. I find this brush is actually also quite good for brow bone highlights. So I'm gonna actually go into that Hourglass palette again and grab this highlight shade and put this on the brow bone with that Rephr number 26. I find that this shape is also just really good for this kind of precise application, but still kind of diffused effect. And then the other brush you could use for this is the Rephr number 13, going into that highlight and doing the inner corner area. Again, Rephr number 13 is not a brush I really like a lot for any of these use cases, but it can be versatile. So that's it in terms of demoing all of these Rephr brushes. I'm going to go off camera, finish off this look with some eyeliner, and then be back with the other products from Rephr that are not makeup brushes. So here we are with the final look. What do you guys think? Another use case for this Rephr number 23 is after I put the eyeliner on, I use this just to kind of smudge it a little bit along the water lines. So if you want something really detailed like that, this Rephr number 23 is a great brush for that. So zooming you guys out, let's get into some of the non-makeup brush stuff from Rephr. So first off, we have here the Rephr Eye Curler. And I would say for me, this is kind of okay, not great. So I feel like a lot of people have really raved about this eyelash curler, but personally, I still prefer my eyelash curler from Shiseido. For me, whenever I use this lash curler, it does just tend to pinch my eyelid a little bit, which of course is not my favorite sensation. So I do occasionally use this and think it's effective at doing its job, but it's just not the best fit for my eye shape. So just quick warning there in case you have a similar eye shape to me. That said, I have heard a lot of people really like this, so I could be the exception. The next product is this brush soap from Rephr. So I basically use this pretty much on a daily basis to clean my beauty blender and to clean my brushes after use. And overall, I would say it's a pretty solid brush soap. So for context, before this, I was using Castile soap. So the kind of like Dr. Bronner's, like baby unscented soap. And that works really well also. I would say I actually prefer the way my brushes feel after being washed with the Castile soap. They feel really clean, but they also feel moisturized, whereas this soap really strips off any gunk from your brushes. So really good for heavy duty cleaning, but it does leave them a little bit more dry and fluffy than I prefer. So I'm going to continue using this until it's done, but I wouldn't necessarily go out and repurchase this. For me, I think I got this free with an order, and if I got more of these free with orders, I would definitely continue using them, but it's just a little bit drying on my brushes. I will say though, after going from liquid soap to this block soap, I do highly prefer this method because you can just sort of wet the brush or wet the beauty blender and then rub it on this and then use the suds to clean your brush or beauty blender. Whereas for the liquid one, you need kind of a separate container like a cup or something to put the liquid in. And so I do like that for this one, I can just put it next to my sink and it's really easy to use. Next up, we have these organization containers for Rephr, and this is actually probably one of my favorite products from them. I mean, it's not necessarily the most beautiful organizational system ever, but it's really nice for makeup and looks very tidy. So I have two types. So I have two of the same type. We have this kind over here. I really like this for storing lipsticks, concealers, really any sort of stick products. It's really nice to make sure you can actually see everything clearly. Let me actually give you guys a close-up. So this is two of them over here, and they are magnetized so they can stick together like this. And I like that sort of modular capability. In addition, I also have one of these that just has one split down the middle. Hopefully you guys can see that. So basically it's two sections. This is where I keep my lip liners, and this is where I keep some brow products. So I find this is really handy for things that look more like pencils. I would say the only thing I don't like about these is they don't actually stick from every orientation. Like you can see, this part is actually sort of repelling itself, whereas this side sticks. And so that's just one thing to note. It doesn't stick in all directions. But if you're on the hunt for makeup organization, I would highly recommend checking these out. They're very affordable. I think it's only like $10 each or something, and then with the sale you get an additional discount. So it is a good way to organize your makeup. So now with all of the products out of the way, let's get into my overall thoughts about Rephr brushes and my overall recommendations. So on the whole, I would say Rephr is a really excellent brand to check out if you are new to Fude brushes, or if you want to expand your existing Fude collection and want to experiment with different sorts of shapes and sizes. I would say at regular price, they're not necessarily always worth it. If you find a Rephr brush that has a similar price to a Sonia G, Chikuhodo, Wayne Goss, Hakuhodo Koyudo brush, then you might want to go with one of those OG brands instead. But especially during sales time, it's really hard to beat the prices of Rephr brushes. And so for me, that's why I've ended up collecting so many of them, even though I also have a really large Fude collection of other brands. In comparing their quality with other brands, I would say that a lot of the other brands just have slightly softer bristles and feel a little bit more luxurious. But in terms of workhorse brushes, Rephr is a really great brand to check out. The quality is definitely there in terms of practicality and usability. The one thing I don't like about the brand is I do feel like they copied some of the shapes of other brands. I mean, it depends how you consider the uniqueness of brush shapes. Of course, you can make the argument that there's only so many brush shapes out there, but I do feel like, especially with the Wayne Goss crease brushes, they pretty much exactly copied the line. So that's the one thing I really don't like. But in terms of a consumer perspective, I think they're a really great quality brand to check out for affordable brushes during their sales. In terms of the top brushes I would recommend, I would say that their eye brushes really stand out to me as the brushes I like the most. So the Rephr number 16, excellent for transition shades. Rephr number 15, great for slightly deepening things up. Rephr number 14, one of the best brushes for just all sorts of use cases around the crease area. Rephr number 2, really great for packing on shadows and also for lower lash line work. Rephr number 26, excellent for more diffuse lash line work and also brow bone highlight and inner corner highlight. In terms of face brushes, my favorite are the Rephr number 20, really excellent easygoing fan brush, perfect for highlight. The Rephr number 4, still one of my overall favorite shapes for bronzer and contour. The closest thing I have to this in the rest of my collection is the detail brush from Sonia G, but this one's just slightly bigger, which I prefer. And then I'd also recommend the Rephr number 5 brush just in terms of an all-over, really jack-of-all-trades brush. You can use this for pretty much any sort of face powder, and it does a really great job. So that's it for today's video. I would love to hear in the comments what you guys think about Rephr. How do you guys feel about this whole like copying other brands thing? Does that bother you at all? And are there certain Rephr brushes that you really like or ones that haven't worked for you? Makeup brushes are so personal, so I'm always curious to hear about other people's experiences. But thank you guys so much for joining me today, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you all so much for joining me, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!